Stays?
Yes.
Good boy.
Oh, thanks. It worked. Yeah, nice. Welcome back to the Canine Campus podcast. This is episode 19. Today we're talking about attention training with Devin Gasson from Canine Campus. We're going to talk about why it's important. We're going to talk about how you're going to teach attention training. And then we're going to talk about how to put attention training to work for you. Welcome back, Devin. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. And yourself?
I'm doing good, thanks. So it sounds like from our pre-session conversation about attention training, this should have been the first podcast that we did.
I feel utterly foolish that this has not been a podcast yet and wasn't, if not the first one, at least the early ones.
Right.
Although our first three were kind of the basic obedience class, orientation class, and it comes up in that. But
sure, right.
Because this is literally the foundation of everything. If you cannot get your dog's attention reliably, you can't ask them to do anything.
Right.
So often when I encounter clients or people out with their dogs and I hear repeated cues, sit. Mm-hmm. You know, the first 5, the dog's not even looking at them. The dog doesn't even know they're being spoken to.
Right. They've become desensitized to
not that they're distracted, right? And they haven't. It's sort of like if you're in a bookstore looking for a book and I come up, in the near vicinity and start asking you something, how do you know that question is addressed to you?
Right.
Yeah. Normally it's like, I say your name, Stace, yeah. Well, now I ask you a question. So, but I wait to engage your attention before I make a request. And people never do that with their dogs. Right. They just sort of feel like their dog should be waiting on bated breath for any interaction with them.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't care that you're sniffing deer poop. I'm now going to ask you to do something, and I just expect you to, magically know that this request is coming your way.
Right. And so also, one of the things we talked about was I was a little confused, less so now, about the difference between name recognition or name recognition as being kind of a subclass of attention training.
Right.
And that's kind of related to what you're talking about these repeated cues and just kind of...
Yeah, so, what this is about is teaching your dog a cue. That means drop everything and look at me.
Right.
You don't have to come to me. You can be 50 feet away, but I need you to drop everything and look at me because I'm about to ask you to do something.
And when you say drop everything, we're not confusing this with the drop it command,
right?
But
it's
with
like,
just stop.
I don't care what you're interested in. You need to turn and look at me for a moment.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the cues that you can use is the dog's name. So this is sort of akin to when we were kids, and when your parents really wanted to get your attention, they used your full name. They threw in your middle name too, and when you heard that, you knew you were supposed to
Devin Day Gaston.
Right, pay attention and show up. So I really like name recognition. The problem with name recognition, however, and what I mean by name recognition is using the dog's name as the cue to look at you.
Right.
The problem with it is if you are someone that talks to your dog a lot. Oh, Fido, let's go do the laundry. Oh, Fido, I think the mailman's here. If you're a chatter to your dog, then and you use their name a lot, you might not want to use their name for this cue.
Right.
Because, again, every single time you issue this cue, you are going to train your dog to look at you. And if there are times you use your dog's name and you don't expect them to look at you, you're undermining the cue.
Right.
And dogs can't tell, well, this is just about laundry, so I don't have to look at her. Oh, this is about coming when called. I do need to look at her. I mean, they can't tell the difference.
So it needs to be very specific.
It needs to be black or white. I mean, either every single time you say your dog's name, they look at you, or they don't.
Mm-hmm.
And if name recognition is not, if using their name is not a good cue for you, there are other cues you can use. Look, watch me. Over here. I mean, there's a million things you can use.
So the idea is that you're creating a cue, whether it's the dog's name or it's just some other attention cue that you're going to remember, where the dog zeroes in on you like a laser.
Right. And I use this cue all the time before I ask for something. Unless a dog is already specifically looking me in the eye and completely engaged with me. And especially if you live in a multi-dog household, you have to specify who the request belongs to.
Right.
If you've got 3 dogs and you're wanting one of them to sit, you've got to have a cue that singles out that dog.
Right.
This one's for you. And by the way, if you use clicking or yesing or event markers, which we've talked about in the past, again, if you live in a multi-dog household, it's really helpful if you can say the dog's name and then click, so they know that that click belonged to them.
Right. Exactly.
Now, some people say to me, well, do you not goober on your dogs verbally?
Mm-hmm.
And I say to them, I absolutely do goober on my dogs. In fact, at the preceding the beginning of the recording of this podcast, there was a heated discussion on whether or not the dogs were allowed in the room where we were recording the podcast. Yeah. And I lost. My vote was yes. I think having doggy background noise is more than appropriate and kind of fun.
A little distracting.
You found it distracting, so the Poochie Poos had to exit. But I goober on my dogs all the time, but I goober with nicknames. And that wasn't something that I planned. I mean, it wasn't like I had this grand training scheme and this is how it came to be. Yeah. Just like when you have little kids, everyone gets kind of a nickname. And I had a nickname too when I was a kid. And that's why when I heard my proper name, I came to attention.
Something different.
So that's how I've worked it out in my household. So my point is this. It doesn't matter what your cue is, whether it's your dog's name or look or watch me. Mm-hmm. But you need a cue that tells your dog to drop everything and pay attention to you because you're about to ask them to do something. In the absence of this cue, you will never have reliable behavior, especially in the presence of distractions. It's that important.
So let's go back to that for a second. Now, since we're talking about reliably getting attention, just like reliably getting a recall or reliably getting a sit, it kind of seems like it's almost it's kind of a meta thing. I mean, you've got to have this. I think people start their training procedures, they've got their dog's attention and they don't really know it, and it's because they've got a meatball on their hand or they've got kibble or they're in the training mode, and so they've already engaged their dog. But can we go back, talk about why it's important? I mean, what are the different ways that we get our dog's attention? There's,
usually by repeating cues 50 times. Right. And by the third or fourth repeat, the dog's like, oh, you're saying something. Could that possibly relate to me?
Right.
And that results in a dog that actually thinks the cue for sit is sit, 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 and waits for the 10th sit.
Right. Okay.
And I disagree with you in that, when we're in a training environment, our dogs are paying attention to us because we might have treats on us.
I think we think that. I don't know if that's true or not.
I can only tell you, in group classes, I've got dogs that are much more interested in other dogs and much more interested in other things in the room. And it amazes me how a dog can have their back to their handler. Mm-hmm. I mean, giving a play bow to another dog, and a handler can say sit, and actually expect something to come of that.
So one of the big problems, and it sounds like, is what we don't realize, and I think this is what I was talking about when it seems like attention is such a meta thing when it comes to dog training, is that this is the principle that everything is based on, and oftentimes we take it for granted as trainers. We think that we kind of think that we're the center of our dog's universe.
I don't even think that we take it for granted. I think that we don't think about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a basic rule of communication we have with our own species.
Right.
And from that point of view, I think it's so ingrained that we just don't think about it.
Well, one of the things...
That's why I gave the bookstore example. I'm not going to go into a bookstore and just start talking without identifying the person to whom my communication is directed.
Right, exactly. Well, great. Well, we're talking about attention training on the Canine Campus podcast. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about how you're going to teach this. We'll be right back on the Canine Campus podcast. Welcome back to the Canine Campus podcast. This is episode 19. Devin and Stace talking about attention training. While we've got your attention, we'd like you to do us a big favor. Obviously, you're a dog person, and because you're a dog person, you probably know some dog people. It would be a huge help to the Canine Campus.
We do tend to hang out in packs.
We tend to hang out in packs, exactly. It would be a huge help to the Canine Campus for you to press pause on iTunes right now. If you're driving, don't do this on your iPhone. But... press pause on iTunes, open up your email, send the link to caninecampus.com to 2 or 3 of your friends that are into dog training. Audience participation is really the foundation of what makes this show doable for us. And so the more people that are involved, the more fun it is for us, and the more we can help people.
And I think it's so important, especially in the world we live in the kind of training that is getting attention on TV. We have got to evangelize positive training techniques.
Absolutely.
And it's a grassroots level kind of thing.
Right.
And admittedly, it's me or the dog is, on Animal Planet, it's like, oh, phew, the first like kind of bone we got thrown. Yeah. The positive training world we're actually making out there. But it's the only way this is going to become the standard for training. And I think this is so essential in teaching compassion and respect, not only for, other species, but for our own. I just think it's essential. And if you could spread the word, it would be so great.
So as Evan says, throw us a bone and get in touch with some of your friends. Let them know about the Canine Campus podcast. We want to spread the word. We want to get more listeners involved. So we're back with attention training, and we want to get more people involved. And the best way to do it is to send them to caninecampus.com. That's www.caninecampus, all one word, .com. We're back with attention training. Devin, we've talked about why this is important. You really can't do anything in terms of training without having your dog's attention. There's a lot of ways we kind of fool ourselves into thinking that we have our dog's attention. Look, things like that. But now we're going to talk about how you're going to teach this. Where do we start?
Well, we start, let's say 10 to 15 repetitions, low distraction environment within a foot or two of your dog. If you're in a low distracting environment, you can absolutely use your dog's kibble for this, or whatever they eat regularly if they like it and they think it's yummy. It helps if your dog's hungry. You're going to say your attention word once and only once, whether it's their name, whether it's look, whether it's watch me. And you want to be on the lookout for any indication that your dog processed that word. The first 10 to 15 times, they do not have to look at you. If their ear twitches, if they pause mid-step, if they quarter turn their head, I mean, literally any indication that that word went into their brain.
Right.
You yes or click and treat.
Okay.
The moment, you've got to get your yes or your click out the moment you see that. So you've really got to be anticipating that they're going to pick it up. And so you want to do this 10, 15 times in a row. And what's going to happen after 4 or 5 times is your dog's actually going to start looking at you, because they're going to start realizing, oh my God, I think there's a treat. Or I'm getting a little kibble. So once they're reliable, within a foot, and you've done it 10 or 15 times, you can start adding a little bit of distance. Now, what I mean by that is you're not going to go from 1 foot to 15 feet. You're going to go from 1 foot to maybe 3. Once again, still low distraction environment. So you want to get to the point over the course of 2 or 3 sessions, and you can do this 10 or 15 times per session. Don't ask for anything else during this session. So in other words, don't issue your attention cue, yes it, and then ask your dog to sit before you give them the treat.
Right.
Just treat them for that attention. You start adding some distance, and after 3, 4, 5 sessions, you should be able to work in a low distraction environment 10, 15, 20 feet away. Your dog looks at you reliably. Then you want to get closer to your dog, again within a foot, and you want to bring a distraction into the equation. And I think this is so important in training that you don't, once you get it established in your house, go outside to the backyard. That's kindergarten work to PhD level work without doing the intermediary steps. And you are setting your dog up to fail. So I think what's really important when you start introducing distractions into your training is that you introduce them inside, and they're distractions you can control. So one of the ways I do this is, again, after I've gotten some fairly reliable looks in a low distraction environment, over the course of a few sessions, I take a treat and I put it in front of their nose and I hold it out to my side. So I actually give them a reason to look somewhere else other than me, right? So they're usually staring at the treat. I say their name once and only once, or whatever attention cue you're using, and then I just wait. And you might wait 20, 30 seconds. Your dog might jump up for the treat. Just make a fist if they do. Don't give them any other input. Don't say no. Don't swat them down. It's a waiting game. Some point, they're going to turn to look at you to say, hey, what's the deal? Yes. And then you hand them the treat you were holding out. So the way to get what you want, which is over here, is to look at me here. And so again, to repeat that, this first step with distractions is I've got a treat. I show it to them. I get their attention goes to the treat. I hold it out to the side. Make sure they can't get it either by foot, putting it in a fist, but you have to sort of be within range of them with the treat.
Exactly. Then giving them the attention word cue. and waiting it out.
Yeah.
And then when I get the response I want, do they get the treat that was in that hand?
Yes,
Okay,
they get the treat that was in that hand, and
right.
you can build up. Like once they're really good at that, you can start using their food bowl. You can start using their favorite toy.
Right.
Does your dog love tug? Well, hold the tug toy out, and when they look at you, that's when the game starts.
Sure.
Hold a ball out. When they look at you, that's when the ball gets thrown.
Right.
Now, I will say this: that when I'm actually working with the dog in distracting environments I can't control, which we're going to talk about shortly, how to integrate this into sort of your daily training, I will, if I issue name recognition and I do not get their attention, I will make some other sound
kind of noises
rather than repeat their name. Because like any other cue, if you're going to say it repeatedly, dogs realize, just like we did. I mean, when I was a kid, I knew my mom was going to call me 5 times into dinner. So I blew off the first 4.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And that's what dogs learn to do. So I make sure when I issue a cue, I get it. But once again, when I'm in a low distraction environment and I can control the distractions and I have some control over the environment, I just wait them out.
Right.
I mean, I don't let them do anything else, and I just wait them out. At some point, they're going to turn and look at me.
Yeah.
If I'm outside, however, that might not be the case, right? I've done my training inside. I'm now ready to take it outside. I would take it outside on a leash first, so you have some control of their exploration, because that's what people don't understand, is if you say their name, they blow you off, and they're sniffing deer poop. They've essentially gotten a meatball or like the best treat imaginable for not paying attention to you. So you need to make sure that when you do take this into areas where you can't control the distractions, like the backyard, you need to have some control over the dog. You need to have a way to control their access to self-rewarding elements. And a leash is a really good way to do that. So, but inside, it's a waiting game, and I don't help them. But once again, I mean, this is not a process. I think where people get frustrated with training is, and I definitely have people that come to my basic obedience class and think at the end of 6 weeks their dog is going to be fully trained.
Right.
No, 2,000 repetitions are required for any kind of fluency. 2,000 repetitions. That's a successful response to a cue. And that's why we think our dogs, when they're 3, 4, and 5 years old, are fabulous and perfectly trained, because by then they've done things about 2,000 times and they get it.
Right.
So, and I understand when the environment changes and the distractions change, I've got to adjust my training. I've got to ask for less short term and make it easier for them to succeed.
Sure. Now, when's the best time to start with attention training?
Puppyhood. The second they come through the door. This is the first thing we teach a dog.
Yeah.
This and sit for everything. Although we don't give the sit cue. I mean, Surprise didn't know a cue for the behavior sit until I think he was 9 months old.
Right.
But he sat for everything. He sat for everything.
And he still does.
Absolutely still does. But, I get their name. I've got to have a way to get their attention.
Right.
I just must.
And the point is, again, that doing this and starting with this and really focusing on this from the outset is going to make all your training more effective,
start making it a condition by which your dog gets really great things. For example, if you're going over for a play group, your dog's going to get to play. Don't try to get their attention when you're 2 feet away from their best friends. When you're in the parking lot, get your dog to look at you.
Right.
Run them into the enclosure the first few times. Then you can start getting a little bit closer. So you get to the point where I don't take the leash off unless you look at me. And then you get to go play with your friends. Right. So looking at you is a really good thing, because it gets the best things in life started.
Yeah.
And our dogs actually do this a lot on leash. We have a go sniff cue. So we don't have a polite walking cue. If our dogs are on a leash, they're walking politely next to us. That's the way it goes. And if they're not, we're not walking. But we do have a go sniff cue. And very often when they're looking at something, there's deer poop over there and I'm kind of interested in it, what is the first thing they do? They look at us.
Right.
Hey, I know if I check in with you and I make this connection with you, you might ask me to do something, but this is going to start the process by which I get to smell the deer poop. And that's great.
And that's a pretty good
So
thing.
this needs to be, you've got to be creative about your reward system. This is not just about treats. It's what your dogs find rewarding, and looking at you is the way they get to go outside, play with other dogs, get to chase deer if they're allowed to,
Right.
get up on the couch if they're allowed to. I mean, this needs to be, especially in the early training stages, the first couple of months, this needs to be the foundation.
And it sounds like it's really not that hard to do. This isn't something you need to go buy a book on. This is something that you just need to start with at the very beginning. And before we wrap up this how we're teaching it segment of the podcast, how long does this training go on? Is this a lifetime thing, or is this the kind of thing that, within a year or two, if you're consistent with the training?
Well, I think that it's the kind of training that within a couple of months you should have, if you've been mindful, you should have a fairly reliable look cue.
Right.
And especially if you're using life rewards, like getting to go outside, getting to play with other dogs, if that's integrated into your life, then you're reinforcing this all the time anyway.
Right. And you're reinforcing yourself by, using the attention cue properly, not overusing the attention cue. And kind of, as with all training yourself to be a good trainer.
But you also have to be on the lookout. I mean, when I say my dog's name and they look at me, and let's say I said it in error, right? I was conversationally discussing something with you, and a dog looks at me. I will turn to them and say, "Good dog. What a good decision.
And we've
Thank
had
you."
That happens all the time.
Right. So my dogs don't live in a vacuum.
Right.
They also don't get treated, especially the older ones, very much at all in terms of food treats, life rewards all the time. But when I inadvertently use it and I get the response that I should have gotten, I acknowledge that. It's important to acknowledge that. Good job. That's exactly what I trained you for.
Right.
We've got that straight in our communication system.
We're talking about attention training on the Canine Campus podcast. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about how to put attention training to work for you.
Real life considerations.
Real life considerations. You're listening to the Canine Campus podcast. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Canine Campus podcast. We're talking about attention training, and while we've got your attention, again, be sure to tell all your friends to visit caninecampus.com and tune into the podcast. Listener participation is what makes the show go round, and if you're interested in sponsoring the Canine Campus podcast, there's no better way to reach thousands of invested and really serious, sometimes kind of scary serious dog people.
Devoted
dog people. Yeah, exactly. So there are plenty of opportunities for sponsoring the podcast. If you'd like information on how many thousands of people you can reach and what the show is all about, drop Devin a line at devin@caninecampus.com. That's DEVEN at caninecampus.com, or give us a phone call at 434-973-1050. Again, we're back talking about attention training on the podcast.
Stays?
Yes.
Good boy.
Oh, thanks. It worked. Yeah, nice. So how do I put attention training to work for me? And what are the real world considerations?
Okay, so once you've kind of, you've worked in a low distracted environment, you've added distractions inside, you've taken it outside in fairly low distraction environments. You might start in your garage, then out on your driveway, then up by the front of your house, backyard. Once you've sort of got this really well established, it's really critical to prioritize your reward system in a way that's consistent with the way you value certain behaviors. So what I mean by that is, if I'm in a dog class right now with, let's say, Silly or Misu, who are older, right, 9 and 7.
Sure.
And they know the lay of the land, right? They know all their cues, sit and down, all that kind of stuff. If I'm in a dog class with them, the biggest challenge for me in that class is getting their attention.
Right.
So if the instructor says, okay, everyone get your dog to sit, I will say their name once, and I will reward them for looking at me. I will then ask them to sit and most likely not reward them, right? Just other than verbal praise, like good dog. Because once I get their attention, those behaviors they know, they're fluent, they've been well trained, they've been well reinforced. So if I'm in, out on a downtown mall where there's a lot of people and there's a lot of dogs, again, I save my treats for getting their attention, because once I have that, then I see
everything
people treat for sit for years. I'm sorry, after 4 weeks in my puppy class, dogs no sit. And I would even say it was actually really after 2 weeks for most dogs. You don't need to train that you don't need to reward that anymore. Not with a, highly specialized food treat. If they're sitting for their food bowl, they're getting rewarded for it. If they're sitting before they get to go outside, they're getting rewarded for it. If they're sitting before they get pet, they're getting rewarded for it. They don't need a specialized treat. I save those for teaching new things and for getting attention in highly distracting environments.
Right.
And again, our husky's a social butterfly. She loves nothing more than to greet people. She's actually not that wild about food. She never has been.
Right.
So if she wants to greet someone, and she knows, when there's someone that's approaching her that has their eyes on her and clearly is having their husky love moment. She knows it. She mesmerizes people. And she has learned, if you don't look at me first, and usually have to do something else. It might be sit down, spin, twirl, shake, touch, but you're going to have to do something to earn that privilege. The one thing we get from our dogs is they check in all the time. It's worth their while to. I think, by the way, this is another reason to teach your dog how to catch a treat. If you can teach your dog how to catch a treat
in midair,
and there's many ways to do this, and we won't get into that in this podcast. This is a lovely way to be able to reinforce checking in from a distance. So if I'm walking in the woods with my dogs and they check in from 20, 30 feet away, I will mark it and throw them a treat. Thank you. That's exactly what I wanted. And may I say that I think name recognition is so critical to reliable recalls. I think the biggest reason people don't have reliable recalls is they're unable to get their dog's attention. And you want to teach this basically with the 2,000 repetitions of any cue gets you, but particularly with name recognition, is it gets you a response that is involuntary. In other words, they're looking at you without thinking. It's pure Pavlovian conditioning.
When it comes to recalls, that's half the battle.
Right. So, once I get a dog looking at me, come is 100 times easier. Also, if come's been blown, in other words, and we've talked about this in previous podcasts, if you've used it to go to work and put your dog in the crate, or call your dog to you, put the leash on and leave the dog park, if it's been the precursor to things where the dog loses out. If you train name recognition right, the dog never loses out. And so half the time when I say my dog's name, they come anyway.
Right.
And so you've built a solid foundation for come, and actually we use this as the foundation for our recall work at Canine Campus. So, when you're screaming come, literally your dog doesn't pay attention to you at all. But if you've got this involuntary response to a name or a look or watch me cue, then you're already 50%. You have a 50% better chance. And by the way, I completely made up that percentage. I have done no scientific studies on this, but I swear it's true. I just anecdotally, I know this to be true. And who knows? It could actually be greater than that. But you have got a much better chance of your dog coming if they're looking at you.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I've noticed, like you said, anecdotally, I've noticed when we've done this kind of work with our own dogs, and I get the attention cue from a distance, the recall seems to happen without me asking for it, just because they've built up, such great
it's like, you said our name, and something really good usually happens when you say our name. Or you're going to ask me to do something anyway, and something good really, usually really happens. Right.
And consider, going back to this being the foundation for all training, if you've got your dog really engaged just by getting their attention, how much easier everything else after that's going to be.
I think it's basic. I never thought of this till this very moment, but I think it's basic consideration.
Sure.
Right? If someone's going to make a request of you, I think it's kind of essential that
you make it worth their while.
Well, but no, more importantly, that that request is for you, and that you're actually able to process it. That you're focused on it. We've all agreed to do something when we're half listening.
Sure.
Most notably probably to our parents, our children, or our partners. We're kind of like, let's say we're paying bills for the month, and we kind of hear this request out of this, and we're, okay, yeah.
Right.
And then we find out later it was for something we hated. Oh, we're all going, bowling with the company on Sunday.
Or something we couldn't do.
Right, or something we couldn't do, and it's like, I'm sorry, I wasn't really focused on that request.
Right, and the lack of attention leads to a big letdown.
Yeah. And frustration for everyone. I think the same is so true for species different than our own. So I think that, it's critical if training is about communication.
Disappointment is universal, right?
Ain't that the truth? And so is frustration. And if training is a communication system, and it's based on, mutual respect. I'm a partner with my dog. I'm a leader, but that's because I have opposable thumbs and I can open doors and I can open dog food, and I can think bigger picture, like no running in the road actually could be a bad idea. I mean, but I consider myself much more partners with my dogs, and when I say their name, I want them to turn and look at me and say, what are we doing now? What is this going to be? What fun are we having? Are we getting in a car?
I think we find it to be a great foundation for everything, not only training wise, but just our relationship in general. As you're saying, the partnership that we have with the dogs, it makes everything a real treat.
Yeah,
well,
and you have
poor choice of
you
words,
have a
but
partner that's enthusiastic about partnering with you.
Exactly.
I mean, who doesn't want
and
that?
That's what this is all about.
That's what it's all about.
Well, I think that's a great note
Even
to
though
wrap.
our partners weren't allowed to be part of the podcast today.
Right. Well, sorry about that. But I think that's a great note to wrap up on, Devin. Thank you so much. We're talking about attention training on the Canine Campus podcast. Again, tell your friends about the show. If you're interested in sponsoring the Canine Campus podcast, there are wonderful opportunities.
If you are in a dog business, if you have dog products, a really wonderful way to reach devoted dog lovers, so devoted that they will download a podcast on a regular basis about positive training. This is a great place to get the word out on your product. So if you're interested in sponsoring the show, please let us know.
Really, if you want to get dog people's attention, this is the way to do it.
Right.
Drop us a line. If you'd like to participate in the podcast, send us an email. Visit our website at www.caninecampus.com. You can leave us a voicemail at 434-973-1050. And, of course, you can email us at podcast@caninecampus.com. So we will talk to you in a few weeks. Thanks a lot, Devin.
Thanks, Stace.
Bye.
Bye.